we are here to talk about a very interesting topic with you today, and that is when she makes more. And what do we mean by that?
When the woman is the breadwinner. And so just a little disclaimer, we are going to be looking at this topic today through a heteronormative lens. This is where the bulk of the research is right now. But I do want to say that as we dive into this topic, I do think that this kind of lens and framework does apply anecdotally to other relationships. So same-sex couples that I know still sometimes feel this need to play out some of these roles. So it's something interesting that we can explore. But
I agree. Another disclaimer is we bring different research and different point of views on topics that are usually taboo or not necessarily common to talk about. And in doing so, we're inviting you into the conversation so that you can reflect how these particular issues show up in your life. So research is one thing, but we are very unique and complex beings, and we don't normally fit in boxes. So just use this as an invitation to join the conversation and really bring self-awareness into your lives. And that's what this journey is all about. But to start us off, when I started doing research on this topic, I relied on the Financial Therapy Association journals because they're really good and they usually have lots of different research components in them. So when I looked up this specific topic, the first thing that was part of the research was really going back and understanding the theory of marriage. So let me just give you a perspective on that, because the theory of marriage was anchored in 1973 by Becker, and his theory suggested that people actually think about utility maximization when they want to decide whether or not marriage makes sense for them. So do I stay single or do I enter a marriage? And for that to happen, there has to be an expectation that your utility, and by utility there's different components to what that even means, which we will get into, is potentially higher, and it's expected to be higher in a partnership than you would otherwise be single.
Yeah, so I think that it's interesting because when we look at, I guess, the history of marriage, it was always a sort of, this is better for survival, this is better economically. I think only now are we really seeing people getting married because they are in love. Like it's more about that relation to each other as opposed to the utility of it all. Like
Absolutely.
I feel like that's really odd. Like, you know, how do I maximize my utility?
Yeah, I can't imagine doing a formula to decide if I'm going to enter this partnership or not. But subconsciously, perhaps on some level, even though like it sounds, because we have romanticized relationships across the years, but I wonder if on some level subconsciously we still have these mental calculations happening in our minds to help us decide whether or not this is the right partner for our lifestyle or our needs and goals. But utility maximization in this particular case, defined by Becker, is really about the quality and the quantity of the different goals you have, and he differentiated them in two different categories. One is called market activity, and that's the ones that are really related to your wage and your earning potential.
So I'm choosing to marry you because now we're going to make more money together.
Well, that's one aspect, and the other is the non-market activity, which is really managing the household, like
this
the chores.
Becker guy is making this really heavy duty. I think that what's really interesting when I think about this is I know so many women who still want the man to be the breadwinner of the household. They're looking at how much a man's potential earning could be in order to make that marriage decision. Like, have you ever based a relationship around these factors?
It's very interesting because when I was like in a dating phase, my girlfriends and I would talk about it, and there's a lot of women who explicitly say, I would not be comfortable dating somebody who makes less money than I do. And there's times where I thought the same as well, because of other factors. Like, I wondered why I feel this way, but I am in a very comfortable and amazing, secure relationship in my life right now, and we're very similarly positioned economically. And in the past, I've been in positions where it's not symmetrical, and there's always been discomfort, and it could have been either
like power dynamics.
Yeah, there's always a discomfort with the power dynamic that comes with that. So
I have never in my whole history of dating, and obviously I was married before, now divorced, I've never ever been with someone who made more money than me. And I actually feel like if I really dig down into it, there's like like I'm like repulsed by the idea like I have to be the one that is the breadwinner.
That's very interesting.
And I don't know like what is going on in my psychology to why that is, but in my marriage of 10 plus years, I was the breadwinner in that relationship. And it's interesting because when I was looking at the research, in this topic, one of the main things that comes up is that in relationships where the woman is the breadwinner, that woman is more likely to be cheated on. And that relationship is more likely to end in divorce.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, so I'm a walking statistic now. But it's true. There is this power dynamic, and it can be, I guess, emasculating because we've had this particular lens that we've been sort of indoctrinated with, where it's that like a man's job is to provide and a woman's job is to, mind the household. And this was a very different dynamic in my relationship. My partner was a stay-at-home dad for periods of time while I was going out working, and our roles were very, very much reversed. But there were certain things that I did in order to ensure that he felt still empowered in that dynamic. So one of the things was like, I'll let you manage all the money and the finances, like I'll bring it in, but you do that. And I was also kind of doing that because I was like, I already do that all day in running my business. So in my household, like I don't want to sit there and do it again and be paying all the bills and whatever else. So you do it so you feel empowered and like you know what's going on and you're making those decisions. So that was how I tried to kind of put that dynamic back in place, I guess. I don't know. Like, have you had clients who have been in similar situations?
It's very interesting because I've had a whole bunch of different scenarios play themselves out when I was a financial planner, and there's times where they keep their finances secret from each other, so you almost feel as if the woman is making more, but you're not 100% sure because of how secretive it becomes and how uncomfortable
like
it becomes.
They don't even know.
They don't even know
each other.
So that's one aspect of it.
What?
So I've seen that happen. I've seen women not necessarily disclose their income to their partner because of how uncomfortable they speculate it being for the relationship. But even here, going back to the research, there's a lot of literature across the years from like 1995 all the way to 2005. So that there's a whole bunch of different research in that time frame that suggests that the more the wife earns her husband and the greater that disparity is, the greater the marital instability becomes. So even though some people may be doing it subconsciously, there's reason for that. Another aspects of the literature suggest that men report lower levels of happiness when their wife earns more. And it's not necessarily the presence of a wife's job that is problematic, but it's only when she starts either working more hours or earning more, then that's the aspects that become problematic for the men. So it's not that the woman is economically empowered, but it's when that empowerment outweighs their own contribution.
It's interesting because I feel like when I look back at my particular situation, it was really easy for me to always use that piece as my excuse for not showing up in the relationship maybe in a particular way. So like I definitely felt very much like, I'm so busy, I'm doing all of this, I'm providing, so I can kind of run the roost in that sense. Like I don't have to clean the shit out of the toilet, or I don't have to do, I just kind of like exempt myself from certain things.
So what do you feel that is? Because this is interesting. And that's also part of the things that came up for me as I was doing research, that women who start making more money than men and become the breadwinners stop using the togetherness language. So it's not about our money or our goals or our future. Now it's because it becomes my money, my future, etc. And they start really counting themselves out of chores and different things like that. So why do you think, let's talk about you specifically, not necessarily the women out there, because everybody has a very unique journey of how these things impact them. Reflecting back on it, why do you feel these things were happening for you?
I was really careful about using togetherness language, and that's like part of it was, here's all of the money, you manage it, you make the decision. So even though I was the higher income earner, there was still times when like I was answering to why why something was being spent or whatever
So
else.
did you feel guilt and you gave him the responsibility of your
I
household?
wanted to keep him feeling empowered, I guess, because subconsciously I was concerned that if that wasn't the case, that there would be a breakdown in that relationship. And I'm, coming from the background that I came from, I think there's like a codependency there and not wanting to be abandoned or left or whatever. So I was trying to kind of like do it all. But in terms of just like certain things around the house, especially if one person is working and one person isn't working, it's an expectation that there's certain things that are being taken care of. And so I think where the frustration kind of can come in is if you feel like I'm working all of these crazy hours, I'm doing all of this stuff to support, and then on top of it, I have to like come home and do X, Y, Z. And this is what I think happens to a lot of women, is that we still hold both sides. Like even if we are more successful economically, we still have this pressure to be the one that's like making the play dates, making the schedules, like sending the card to your mother-in-law, like doing all the things. And it gets to be very taxing and draining. And so I think that is sort of one aspect, that there's that separation or that frustration that starts to come in. It's an interesting thing to think about. I don't know.
A lot of women say that once women started working, so in the past, traditionally, the man goes out, works, and then comes home and expects the chores to be done and all these pieces. But now that women are equally participating in the labor force, if not even more in some instances, the division of labor in the household is not necessarily fair or equal or justified. And that's another point of contention between couples. So it's very interesting that even though we stepped up in our economical contribution, the chores for some reason are still on our shoulders, and so is the case for childbearing and raising children and responsibilities around that. So I find that interesting because it goes back to gender roles and expectation. And every person, you did a disclaimer earlier in the episode about this is really fitting into the heterosexual relationships, but we start to wonder, like now as different relationships exist, how does this show up for them? And as we continue to evolve as humans in the workplace, how is this conversation going to continue to evolve as well?
Well, and I think that this is the whole point of conscious economics, is to bring this awareness into these topics so that we can actually rewrite them. And when we realize how deeply ingrained these patterns of relationship are, and how much they impact everyone, it's important that we kind of think about that. It's a really interesting thing to break down, I believe.
When I reflect on my history now that I think about it, the men I dated in the past, I was very scared to share with them not how much money I made then, because I didn't make a lot of money, but it was almost how much money I dream of and how much money I would love to start contributing and the ambitions I had, because that in itself was a sort of contention coming from the culture I come from. And it was very interesting for me how even sharing my dreams and ambition in themselves were sometimes emasculating. So I started wondering what would happen when I start actually achieving my dreams. Like, what kind of relationships would I start attracting if the conversation itself, just when it's an idea, it is in itself something that was threatening almost.
Yeah. Well, I think that that's really normal. Like I hear a lot of women that maybe got a raise at work and don't even want to tell their partner that it happened because of fear of what the reaction will be. And it's really interesting. I remember somebody saying to me like, oh, like, you're one of those women that wants to work, as opposed to like insinuating that if you want to work or if you've put your career forward in a major way in your life, that somehow you're not the same kind of wife or mother or these things. Like it's all conditioning. But I definitely felt like, because I loved the work that I did, I also felt very validated, like this is my purpose and this is why. But it was just very uncomfortable.
These conversations have layers to them, like layers and layers and layers, whether it's how we feel within like ourselves, and whether it's our relationship, and then you have the societal and cultural elements that add even more complexity to the topic. So there's so much more that we can explore as we continue diving into these topics. But what do we want to leave our listeners with? I really want to invite the listeners to start thinking about how they may potentially be sabotaging their own success because of how these potential barriers or limitations impact the relationship. And I'm specifically addressing women here because there's definitely been times in my career where women were sabotaging their success in fear of how this would impact their relationship. So that's one angle. Another is to start reflecting, if you're a man, on how, start asking yourself these questions. Like, what is wrong with a woman making more money than me, and how does that make me feel? And if it makes me feel uncomfortable, then why is that? And like, asking the right question is important.
Do you think it has something to do with the fact that men would perceive that if the woman was the breadwinner, that they would then have to be this like excellent, homemaker type, and they don't want to do that, or they don't have the role models or the expanders to know how to step into a role like that? Because again, we're seeing it more and more now that we're starting to have more fluidity in terms of the roles within relationships. But I don't know, I think we need to see more examples of every kind of relationship, of every kind of setup and scenario. The more we see it, the more that we talk about it, the more that we hear about it, the more that we can actually start to adapt and like break away some of these frameworks that are so deeply indoctrinated into our being.
I think it depends on the man. Like, I hate generalizing anything really, because I continue to reinforce how unique and complex we are as humans. But my theory is money has meaning that we project on it. So it depends on what meaning you've projected on it that sort of contributes to how you view money and how you treat it in your life and how these issues surface. So for a lot of us, society put a specific meaning associated with power, associated with control, associated with self-worth. So a man sometimes feel that he has less power, less control, less self-worth if he starts making less money. So there's different elements of that, and that's why it's a conversation that I invite to reflect on it in their own life, to start thinking, what is the meaning I project to money? Because that helps you understand why you react a certain way, why you feel a certain way, and then ultimately why you behave a certain way when it comes to the relationship you have with money.
100%. So thank you so much for listening, everyone. And please share with us your thoughts in the comments below. Like and subscribe. And we hope to see you again next week.
And to become a member of this conscious economics movement, you can always visit our website at consciouseconomics.ca to learn more about our programs and how to become part of this financial therapy movement, because this is ultimately the path to healing for us. Thank you.